College with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham, and I'll be joined by Scott German here on a Tuesday as we're in ACC Championship game week, also ACC Big Ten Challenge week. UVA plays UNC in basketball later this week as well, so a lot going on this week. But first, Scott, I got to ask you, we're a few days into this new era of life for those of us UVA fans who are still getting used to the idea that UVA can beat Virginia Tech in football. Has it started sinking in for you yet that actually happened last Friday?
Well, I think it finally has, Chris. And now, being the true Cavalier fans that we are, now that it's finally sunk in, I'm greedy. And I'm thinking, wow, this should have happened last year. And we had a couple of opportunities. There's no way that should have gone 15 consecutive years. But I guess that's just we can't get enough, or we can't ever be totally fulfilled part of our fandom. But it is starting to set in a little bit now, and I've reviewed the game a couple of times on TV, and with the exception of a couple of series, Virginia played a pretty good complete game all around it. I think that the better team certainly did come out on top in the game.
That was going to be my next question. Was how many times did you watch the game afterwards? I wouldn't say I watched the whole game. I watched the fourth quarter 3 times now, it was interesting. That was just a heck of a game. All the games this weekend. And of course, we played Friday, so Saturday and Saturday was a bad weather day in Central Virginia. For those who are listening, you already know that. And so Saturday spent the day watching other teams play football, and it was rivalry week, and our game was, our game and the Auburn-Alabama game were the two best games of the weekend. And I'll also point out that I'll give the TV announce crew credit. Man, they were on that game. We were of course in the stadium and not able to hear them, even though they were sitting just a few feet away from us, but. Jim Mora was right on top of that situation leading into the eventual game-winning field goal. Talking about how we were facing 3rd and 15 from the 40. They don't need to get the first down, just get 9 or 10 yards and see if they can get a field goal attempt out of it, which is what happened. And he was on top of the extra point where Virginia just decided to down the ball instead of kicking it, and the reason there being don't give Tech a chance to block it and run it back for a score. Those guys, I'll give them credit. I have to give them credit because we often are critical of the announce crews for various games, but they were really on their game. I thought especially in that fourth quarter for the game Friday.
Well, I think what we have to remember is that game wasn't being broadcast by the ACC network. I don't believe that was a network. ABC had that game.
Well, but it's this, ABC, ESPN, ACC network, the same cast of characters. They're all the same company. But yeah, we must have got as close to the A team as we could possibly get for Friday's game.
Right. We got the upper echelon of the broadcasters instead of the what I call them the dumpster dives that we've been subjected to all year. But I like the commentary. I think they were very objective, and that final quarter, final 10 minutes of the fourth quarter was about as exciting period of time in Virginia football than I could possibly imagine, and I'll go back a long time following the Cavaliers.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever look at a play in Virginia football history any bigger. Even though Virginia was already winning the game at this stage, that fumble recovery in the end zone, the sack by Mandy Alonso, the fumble recovery by Eli Handback, that's got to be the biggest play in Virginia football history, just clinching that game that way. So now we can turn our attention to, and we have been turning our attention, it's already Tuesday. We're already halfway there from Friday to this coming Saturday, going down to Charlotte. Scott and I will be heading down to Charlotte for the ACC Championship game. And Scott, I want to get your initial thoughts. UVA-Clemson. Clemson 29-point favorite. Nobody thinks we have a chance to win this one. Do we have a chance? Other thoughts you might have on this one?
No, I personally don't believe we do. I think Clemson is so far head and shoulders above everyone else in the ACC. They had a scare the scare of their lives earlier in the year down in Chapel Hill when they came very close to losing to a very mediocre Tar Heel team. I think that scare was enough to kind of let them know that they can't take anyone for lightly. Clemson is just so dominant, Chris. I think we haven't played a team anywhere near the caliber of Clemson all season, anywhere near it. We thought we might when we played Miami or Florida State, but they pale in comparison to what Clemson has. And also, due to the playoff structure, Clemson needs to win, and they need to win some style points, too. So I don't think Dabo Swinney is going to be out there intentionally putting points on the board, but I think it's going to be pretty late in that game until he calls the dogs off. Having said all that, would it surprise me if we played them close, kept it close at half? No, it wouldn't. But I think in the end, Clemson will cover the point spread.
Okay, so Scott doesn't disappoint as far as giving the good answer there. Here's where I try. I usually am trying to talk Scott off the ledge, but this isn't UVA basketball, so we're not talking anybody off the ledge here. And yeah, there's nobody out there, legitimately thinking that Virginia has a chance to win this game. But I'll give you the case for how they can win this game. One, Clemson hasn't played anybody either. Clemson has played, Texas A&M 7-5. They got a win there. They beat a Louisville team that's 7-5, and a lot of other wins against teams with 6-6 or worse records. And one of those was North Carolina, and North Carolina lost by 1, as you mentioned, Scott. Technically, Wofford has 10 wins this year, but Wofford is at the next level down. They're in the FCS playoffs right now. And so this Clemson team hasn't really been tested. No fault of theirs. The schedule is what it is. The Atlantic Division this year weak. A lot of folks thought Syracuse would be better. Syracuse was awful this year. Wake Forest. They had Wake Forest with 8 wins, yes, but Wake lost their last 3 and were blown out in 2 of those last 3, and then lost to a bad Syracuse team in the other one. So they're playing a non-win Virginia team. Bronco Mendenhall makes the case, hey, we had to fight and scratch and claw our way to get here. Clemson, yes, hasn't given up 300 yards in a game this season, which is amazing to think about. Not in one game this season has Clemson given up 300 yards. And Trevor Lawrence threw 8 interceptions in his first 5 games, hasn't thrown one since. So there's a lot of stuff that adds up in a bad way. But what could go wrong here a little bit for Clemson is, one, I think Virginia fans, we remember what it feels like to be a big favorite. Two of our last 3 games, Georgia Tech and Liberty, we were 20-plus point favorites. We eventually did beat Liberty by 28, but that game was tight for a while. The Georgia Tech game stayed tight all the way through. There are times when you're a big favorite in a game, and what happens is if, say, Virginia has a long drive in the first quarter, even if it leads to a field goal or, it does result in a touchdown, you take a lot of time off the clock and you're a 29-point favorite like Clemson is, that could be an issue. You start feeling low pressure here. We got to get the ball back, got to score. What happens if Lawrence does have a turnover for the first time in a while? They haven't faced any adversity in a long time. I'll go back to the Virginia basketball team of 2018, that 31-2 juggernaut in the ACC that year, 20-1 in the ACC. Hadn't faced any adversity really all season long. The first time they faced it against UMBC, they didn't deal well with it. So Clemson hasn't faced adversity really, except for that Carolina game. They haven't faced adversity all season long. So if Virginia can just keep in the game, keep a little bit of pressure on this Clemson team, and there are reasons they can. Bryce Perkins is a big reason why Virginia can stay in this game. If they can just hang around for a while, get a play or two, Clemson, starts getting their butt cheeks a little tight. There is a way Virginia can win this game. I'm not saying that they do win this game, but I think there's a path to victory here for Virginia in this one, and Clemson better watch out. This is a pretty good Virginia team they'll be playing on Saturday night.
Yeah, and to your point, Clemson hasn't been really tested, but they are the defending national champions, and they're rated 3rd in the college football playoff poll. So they're still very, very talented. They're still very well thought of. Virginia could win this game, but it would take Clemson really having some terrible lapses, have to force some turnovers, stay close, and if the game's close, then anything can happen. I think that's the key. The game's got to stay close, got to keep within contact, and Clemson's going to come out to just put that game away in the first quarter. Clemson's mentality is to put it away, score 3 touchdowns, make it a 21-0 game going into the second quarter, and pretty much just fight again.
I'll point out, I wrote a couple columns today on this game. Tuesday, we're recording this podcast on Tuesday, from notes from the teleconference calls, both with Bronco Mendenhall and some UVA players. And reporters kept trying to get Bronco to make this a David versus Goliath kind of thing, try to kind of talk up how much of a challenge this is, how daunting the prospect is of having to play Clemson, and Bronco's not buying it. Every other coach you would talk to would acknowledge that reality. But I think if you're Bronco, and honestly, I think that this kind of goes with, and we as Virginia fans know the basketball side of things really well. We talk about this a lot, that I think what happens to a lot of opponents when they get ready to play Virginia basketball is they psych themselves out before they even get on the court. Oh, wow, we can't score against the pack line. There's things we can't do. We're not going to have a good chance of winning this game unless Virginia, does X, Y, and Z. And that mental approach can be a big part of it. And, with Clemson, I think it's the same thing. Man, you look at that team, look at that roster, look at all those 4- and 5-star guys. I mean, we can't possibly win this game. And then you go out there and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you listen to the conference calls with Bronco Mendenhall, it was also Charles Snowden, Bryce Perkins, Eli Hanback. I'm not talking about guys who are confident that they're going to win, but they're confident they're going to prepare well. They're not just going down there like a lot of people think. And I think a lot of our listeners here think. We're all UVA fans. I think a lot of our folks think, hey, we're in the game. Isn't that awesome? Let's enjoy Saturday, and whatever happens. They're not going down there to just play a football game. I mean, and to some degree, nobody plays football that way. You don't just football's a game with blocking and tackling and all the pain you feel when you play football. I mean, you don't just go out there and go through the motions. They're going down there to win that game, and I'm not saying that leads to a win, but I don't know that I think Clemson wins this game by a blowout. I think they win it. I think it's going to be tighter, and I'll bring this one up to you, Scott. We're going to get your thoughts on this part of it too, for our listeners out there. I'm making an equation here between where Clemson was. Dabo took over. He was an interim coach. Nobody at Clemson thought he should be the coach. He was the wide receivers coach when Tommy Bowden resigned in 2008. And they really, the only reason they named Dabo the coach was the thought was, well, that guy won't be a candidate for the job, so let's make him the coach, and then we'll go hire some big name. And then, second season he takes him to an ACC championship game. Fourth season he wins it. But that Clemson team he took over is not the Clemson team we're talking about now. The Clemson team we're talking about now has won 109 games in the last 9 years. They've won 27 straight games. They've won 2 national championships the last 3 years. But when he took it over, that was a down program. And there's parallels between where Clemson was when Dabo Swinney took over and where Virginia was. Certainly, I mean, we were further down, but we were down when Bronco took over. And year 4, just like year 4 for him, year 4 Broncos got us in a championship game. Let me point out that championship game, Scott, and I just want to get your thoughts. It's there's nothing to it, but there is something to it. That year, year 4, 2011, for Dabo, number 22 Clemson, number 5 Virginia Tech. They were in the same spot we were in. They were big underdogs, and Clemson won that game 38-10. So, we're not going to win this game 38-10, but I'm just saying he was in the exact same place in the 4th year of his program that Bronco is right now. If anybody out there knows that he's got to go out there and game plan to win a game, it's Dabo Swinney. I think I've lost Scott. I think I wowed Scott with my reasoning here. Scott, you still there?
I'm here, Chris. I'm sorry. I think Clemson, there's a lot of pressure on Clemson, a lot more pressure on Clemson than there is UVA. But then again, they should be able to handle this. They played the national championship last year. They're not going to. The pressure of that game is not going to. It's not going to be too big for them. if Virginia's going to win that game, it's going to be because they limited the turnovers, forced some turnovers, make Clemson play out of character. And that's going to even be a tall task because Clemson's so deep. You know, aside from the championship game, you have to go back to looking at the Virginia Tech win. And to me, Chris, that was just such an important milestone for Virginia. I mean, not only winning the game against Tech, but we talked about it on our podcast, the implications of a Virginia football game have never been higher. Never. You can say whatever you want about ACC championships prior to that, but this game had so many implications in that beating Tech not only secured the Coastal Division for us, but more than likely a New Year's Day 6 bowl game. It kept Tech out of there. It stopped a losing streak. You know, I think we just have to give a lot of kudos to the coaching staff for winning that humongous game. That was a game. There was if you talk about pressure, there was an extreme amount of pressure on Virginia to win that game, and they did. They stepped up and they won that game. And I think we kind of lose. We don't want to lose sight of that, regardless of what happened Saturday night in Charlotte.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, and what I'm using that though is, and I know it's a stretch, and I'm just trying to make the case, but I'm trying to say that now I'll use a 1980 hockey analogy. Boy, I'm going to bring up every underdog ever in sports before we're done with this podcast, but I'm remembering the 1980 hockey, and I remember it for this reason. I've watched the documentary that HBO Sports did, a great documentary on that 1980 hockey team. I've probably watched that 15 times. I could probably act it out by this stage. And one thing that really stands out to me from that one was, now one, that U.S. hockey team playing the Russians in Lake Placid had played them in an exhibition game right before the Olympics started, lost 10-3, which in hockey might as well have been 70-7, you know, in hockey terms. But they played the game they played that mattered, the semifinal round of the medal round. The U.S. won, and one thing that one of the Russians said afterwards in the documentary, you know, translated from Russian obviously, was, you know, when they saw the Americans celebrating their victory, they had forgotten what it was like to celebrate a victory, and because they had just won all the time, and they were expected to win, and you know, I'm thinking back to how that sideline erupted on Friday. We saw it with our own eyes, and I saw it again through the TV lens when I watched the fourth quarter a few times since. Man, that stadium, the people, of course. I mean, the stadium was literally rocking. I felt the stadium moving beneath me when Handback recovered that fumble in the end zone. But seeing the TV replay of Bronco Mendenhall, he probably ran 30 yards in one direction and 50 yards back. High stepping, you know, raising his finger one because he's trying to signify, hey, let's kick the extra point. But you could see the relief and the joy and the emotion, and I don't know, that doesn't translate to something. I mean, yeah, you know, Clemson's Clemson, but that said, you know, I just don't think they're just happy having won that game Friday. You know, I wonder if that's a springboard. You know, and whether it's a springboard to winning the game, I don't, you know, I think it's a springboard to playing well and not getting the tarnation beat out of them Saturday night. I really feel like it's going to be a contest Saturday night, and I think this Virginia team is going to lay it all out there.
I agree. I think the win Saturday, the manner in which we won, not just the victory over Tech, but the fashion in which we won down the stretch, coming up with some huge defensive stuff. I think Virginia's still going to be playing on the adrenaline in that. And, you know, Chris, here's another factor that you have to consider. This is going to be an overwhelmingly Clemson crowd. I mean, we may as well be playing this game in Death Valley. I was reading a Greenville, North Carolina, Greenville Times newspaper article. Last year at the ACC championship game, the Tigers played Pittsburgh, and they estimated that there was roughly 60,000 Clemson fans there, and maybe 5,000 Pitt fans, and maybe 5,000 neutral fans. I look for it to be similar. Unfortunately, I don't see our fans buying more than 10, 12,000 tickets, if that. So it's going to be, and that could help Virginia. That could really help Virginia because it's kind of an us against the world mentality, and I don't think it's something that they're going to be awed by because the Cavaliers have gone. I've watched them play on the road at Carolina. That was a very hostile environment in Kenan Stadium, and they played well. So I think that could work to Virginia's favor. And going back to the win against Tech, all that I think is going to build up, and I think it gives me some hope to say that I agree with you. I don't think Virginia's going to win this game, but I think Virginia's going to make it a little more interesting than what most of the so-called experts believe they will.
Yeah, that 29-point line is insulting, and I think that the Virginia guys will take that as the insult that it should be. Clemson probably wins this game, a couple touchdowns at least, 17 points, something like that, but I feel like it's going to be a lot closer than 29. And talking some reality here too, then this idea that first Dabo Swinney is pushing that Clemson better win this game, whatever convincingly, so that they can get in the playoff, keep in the playoff. I even heard there was a panel discussion on Mike Greenberg's show on ESPN this morning, where a similar discussion was made. Let's just quash this right now. The idea that an undefeated Clemson ACC champion team would somehow be left out of the playoff. There's 3 undefeated teams right now. That's assuming LSU and Ohio State both win this weekend as well. But if there's 3 undefeated teams, and Clemson is the third of those 3 undefeated teams, there is no way in absolute hell that a one-loss team jumps over 2 one-loss teams, jump over Clemson. Even if Clemson wins this game 28-27, scoring 28 points in the fourth quarter, coming back from a big deficit, there's no way in hell that Clemson is not in the playoff if they win this game. I still think there's a shot there in the playoff if they lose the game, which, again, but that said, Clemson wins this game by 1 point, by 50 points. They're in the playoff. Am I wrong about this, Scott?
No, I agree with you. Now, I'm not so sure if they lose.
Right.
Because a couple of teams breathing on the heels, knocking up the door right now, and we'll find out more tonight when these polls are released. But I agree. Clemson wins tonight, and all it is just who they're going to play in the first round. They're in. I'm not so sure that if they were to, and maybe win, even narrowly win, Clemson's still in the playoffs. Because the one thing you didn't mention, undefeated, defending national champion.
Yeah.
If they were left out, that would be the biggest scandal in the history of college sports. That would probably put an end to this playoffs because you can't leave out a 13-0 team that's the defending champion. I also agree that if it's a close game, if Virginia plays them close, that has nothing to do with Clemson being in the college football playoffs. That's more of a tribute to Virginia. And if you were to leave Clemson out just because they had a close game with Virginia, that's kind of a slap in the face of the rest of the conference and a slap in the face against Virginia, meaning you're disrespecting what Virginia has done this year. So, no, the only way Clemson gets left out is for Clemson to flat out lose the game. Saturday. I doubt that happens, but you never know. The pressure of playing in the game, having to win. I guess it's cliche, but that's why we play the game. But no way does Clemson get left out if they win or if they win narrowly.
Yeah, right now we'll presume, we've already seen the writers and the coaches polls, but Alabama will drop from 5th. It's probably going to be Utah 5th, Oklahoma 6th, both with 1 loss. Oklahoma's loss, I know, was to a Kansas State team that is certainly not better than Virginia. Utah, I don't have to look up Utah to see who their loss was to, but we'd also be presuming now if, again, going through all the scenarios, that if Clemson were to lose, that also then everybody else wins. Now, of course, everybody else can't win because Georgia, it would be 4th right now, and Georgia beats LSU. Those 2 teams are probably both in. But that doesn't change anything as far as Clemson's concerned. Again, it's more the Utah and Oklahoma kind of scenarios that have to do with that, and it's hard for me to imagine. Okay, Clemson wins again by 1 point. How do you justify, Georgia jumping them and then knocking Clemson down to 4, Utah jumping them, knocking them down to 5, or Oklahoma doing the same thing? Again, if we're talking about a Clemson undefeated team, and a situation where Clemson could lose this game again, which again is not going to necessarily happen. But USC was the team that beat Utah. USC's not ranked right now. I mean, again, UVA is ranked. I think what all this does, and I've been saying this for a while, Scott. I was just hoping against hope. One, from a UVA fan perspective, I wanted us to win and get there because that's what we've been wanting to do for all these years. But from the ACC's perspective, last year was not good. Pittsburgh being 7-5 going into that game was a bad look for the ACC. Nothing you could do about it, but a bad look for the ACC having a 7-5 division champion. This year, I just wanted a 9-3 team, and we have a 9-3 team, a ranked 9-3 team playing Clemson. And so, taking my UVA hat off, putting my ACC hat on, giving Clemson a chance to beat another ranked team heading into the playoff is good for them. I actually look at this weekend, Scott, and I say there's a chance. Obviously LSU and Ohio State have tough games. LSU has to play Georgia. There's no doubt in my mind Georgia can beat LSU. We know Ohio State beat the heck out of Wisconsin the first time. We got to beat them again. Wisconsin's got a puncher's chance. So I'm not thinking both those teams automatically win this weekend. There is a slight chance that, perhaps if there's not enough style points in either of those two wins, that Clemson could jump and be a 2. I don't know that it matters because 2 versus 3, but you're still playing. You're still playing whoever you're playing in that kind of scenario in a 4-team playoff. But I think Clemson has a chance here with a win over Virginia to actually enhance their appearance, not just worry about dropping. I think they have a chance to even jump up to 2 this weekend with a win over Virginia. That'd be an impressive win. So Virginia needs to do their part and play well. If Clemson goes out and wins 56-0, I don't think that does anybody good. I think it's actually worse if Clemson goes out and blows out Virginia, because it'll just say, oh yeah, all they did was win a weak ACC. I think if Virginia makes it a game, we can actually help Clemson's visibility on the national stage.
Yeah, and in the ACC right now, and just from what I've listened on national talk shows and read, it's viewed as a very mediocre league. In fact, I wrote a story yesterday in the Free Press. You got Clemson 12-0, Virginia 9-3, Tech 8-4, Virginia 6 conference wins, Tech at 5, and then it seems like everyone else was just 4-4 until you got to the very bottom, and you had some really, really bad teams at the bottom like Georgia Tech and NC State. I agree. You beat Virginia 56-0, and the theme is going to be, well, that's what the competition. That's who they played all year, and it's not going to really gain Clemson any point. But a solid win and Virginia making a good performance for themselves, I think that's going to benefit Clemson tremendously. But I was looking at the notes, took the notes after the scare down in Chapel Hill for Clemson. And that was Game 5 of the year. Clemson has outscored its last 7 opponents by an average margin of almost 42 points.
Yeah,
and that includes a 38-3 victory over in-state rival South Carolina on Saturday. Clemson in those 7 games just had the superior talent, outmuscled their opponents. Both sides of the ball, just worn down, just depth, and a lot of times the game was not even in contention in the second quarter. This could be a different situation for Clemson, and I think that, as we said, it's not going to be a bad day. If this is a relatively close, competitive game at half, if Virginia just wears out in the third quarter, or late in the third quarter, or fourth quarter, well then that's a different story, and that's probably going to be what benefits Clemson the most. A convincing win over a strong opponent, not a dominating, embarrassing win over what would be perceived as just another weak Atlantic Coast Conference team.
Yeah. I think we've made the case there that as long as Virginia can hang around, it's a 1% chance Virginia wins this game, and a lot has to go wrong, including food poisoning for the entire Clemson team, most likely for that to be the case. But Virginia hangs around, 10 points or so at halftime, make Clemson sweat a little bit, make them play in the fourth quarter for the first time in a while. They haven't of those 7 opponents, they've been beating by the average of just under 42 points a game since September 28th. Only 2 of those teams have winning records, and one of those is Wofford. So, it's not like they've played the greatest schedule either since the win over North Carolina. And Virginia just has to hold that. For anybody out there listening right now, it was only one of the 12 games Clemson played, but just channel your thoughts of Clemson, North Carolina. Virginia could be the Carolina here, and we can get the 2-point conversion at the end. So we're going to go down. It's a 7:30 kickoff Saturday night. Scott and I are leaving early Saturday. We'll be down there. And then we turn our attention. We have to get back in the car early Sunday and get our butts back up 29 to Charlottesville for UVA-UNC basketball. Of course, we have another game, and that's actually tomorrow night on the road in the Big Ten ACC Challenge at Purdue. Good news, Scott. No Carson Edwards for Purdue, so he won't be making 3-pointers all game long tomorrow night. But I guess we kind of know what it feels like to play a road game at Purdue, because the game against Louisville in the Elite Eight was pretty much a road game at Purdue. But I want to get your thoughts. I'll tell you, I've got some thoughts here. I'm a little worried, not just on our side, but Purdue's lost 3 games, but they've played a tough schedule. They beat VCU last week on a last-second 3-pointer. They lost in overtime to Florida State. They've already played a kind of tough schedule getting to the stage. I feel like they may be a little more battle-tested than we are, and we may be down a couple of guys. So a little worry going into tomorrow night, but I want to get your thoughts as we're heading into the game tomorrow night with Purdue.
Well, thank goodness we're not having to face Edwards. Thank goodness that he's moved on, because he'd still probably come out and be lighting them up from half court. The key to this game is going to be how do they respond if they're still playing without Braxton King, because I don't think they've had enough time to adjust. They certainly didn't get a real strenuous workout in their last game without Braxton against Maine. They were absolutely putrid in that game offensively. Don't know what they could do in practice to prepare themselves to playing without Braxton. Hopefully, they'll get Statman back. That'll help give them some depth. I think it just depends on how well we're playing on offense. We're due for a breakout game on the offensive side of the court, and I think this is a matchup where Jay Huff gets a lot of minutes in this game, and you don't really count them out. And I think they've got a real good chance of winning, but I believe they're going to have to find a way to score more points than what they've been doing. They're going to have to shore up the offensive side of things. I was looking at Vegas, the over-under points for this game, Chris, 102. That's amazing. 102. That's saying each team is going to be somewhere in the very low 50s, which is probably about true. And that's probably the way Virginia is going to approach this. They're going to try to win it ugly again. But I think the key is how well we respond, how much we improve if we're playing without Braxton. Again, how much we adjust and what type of improvements offensively we see without him on the floor.
Yeah, I looked at looking at KenPom.com's projection for this game. It has the final score being 50-48 and the number of possessions at 54 per team. Virginia's 353rd in the country, which is dead last in a number of possessions per game, which we're used to that. That's where we've always been. And Purdue is 348th, so this will be a slow game in that sense. A very methodical game. Maybe a better way to put it. Methodical. That sounds better. But, when I was writing my preview for this game, I started to say this game won't look anything like last year's Elite Eight game because the final score of that game was 80-75. And then I looked at the number of possessions when I broke the game down, and it's weird I didn't remember this, because we of course covered that game. That was a game that led to our first Final Four appearance in over 35 years. The number of possessions in that game, including the overtime, was 62. So, I mean, it's not that we played a fast game to go 80-75 with them last year. It's just that both teams were so efficient offensively. Neither is nearly as efficient offensively this year. Purdue, I think you hit something good there, Scott, when you talked about how Virginia will be able to play with Jay and Mamadi an awful lot. There are teams that make it hard for us to be able to do that. When you play teams who play 4-guard or even 5-guard lineups, which there are a lot of teams who do that in this day and age. Virginia Tech will be one example of that when we play them here in a few weeks. It can be hard to play both a 6'9" guy and a 7'1" guy when there's, one of those guys going to have to chase a guard around for a while. Purdue's big. Purdue is, according to KenPom.com, they're the 10th biggest team minutes-wise, height-wise per minute in college basketball. We'll be able to go with our best lineup, which will be Jay and Mamadi. Sources close to the program, let's call it, told us that Braxton was supposed to be reevaluated yesterday for possible availability tomorrow night. We won't presume until we, I guess, pull up stat broadcast, a few minutes before tip-off, whether or not that'll be the case. Virginia sports, both football and basketball, that we cover very actively, they're not very good about telling you ahead of time who's actually going to be available in a lineup or not. We know, at least we know that Jay and Mamadi should be out there for good minutes. We'll hope that Cody and Braxton are back. If they're both back, that's great. If not, it's going to be a tough night tomorrow night. We'll worry about Carolina down the road, but should be a good test for this team, a road test, and a team that, I say this, they're going to want our heads tomorrow night. I mean, they're going to – that fan base we kind of know the feeling. They were about as close as you can get to a Final Four without being in one, about 0.2 of a second away. So that should be an interesting environment to play in tomorrow night as far as that goes. So that's a 7:15 tip. And Scott, I wanted to change gears here a little bit. We were texting last night, Monday night, we were both watching NBA League Pass. We'll talk about the NBA, the UVA guys in the NBA in a second. But we were both watching NBA League Pass, and then as the game started kind of cycling out, I was watching the Pacers game with the Grizzlies. Because of watching Malcolm play. Malcolm had a great game, 19 points, 9 assists. And one of the players on that Pacers team is Domas Sabonis. His father, Arvydas Sabonis. I don't know what made me make this connection, but I thought, boy, that 1982 game, the UVA team played against the Soviet national team, came to mind for me. I did a quick search and actually found the game on YouTube, the entire game on YouTube, including commercials, which were funny. My wife couldn't believe some of the stuff because I played the commercial breaks. I made her watch commercials. Then I text Scott and say, hey, I'm watching the UVA versus USSR from 1982. And Scott, being Scott, texts me back, I was there. Because, of course, Scott was there. Scott's been everywhere the last 40 years of UVA basketball. Scott, I wanted to get your memories here. I didn't tell you ahead of time I was going to ask you this, but tell me about that game. 1982, UVA's playing the Soviet national team. What was that environment like? I think I lost Scott again. Scott, you still there?
I'm here, Chris. It was unbelievable. He texted me last night. It was like deja vu, just like someone had reached into my memory and tapped the reset button. It was a jam-packed Richmond Coliseum, and the Richmond Coliseum, Chris, in 1982, which would now be 37 years ago, was in dire need of improving then, and it's still sitting there 37 years later. So it kind of gives you a current commentary on the state of the Richmond Coliseum. But it was just a hard ticket to get, very, very difficult ticket to get, almost as difficult to get a ticket to that game as it was getting a ticket to the Georgetown UVA game, the Pat Ewing Ralph Sampson game. The reason being is that the Capitol Center held almost 20,000 fans. Richmond Coliseum barely over 10. And we were playing a USSR team. Or was it called USSR then? Or
yeah, it was still the Soviet national team. Yeah.
Led by their big center, Arvidas Sabonis, whose son is now currently, I believe, in the NBA or still in college.
He's with the Pacers. That's what I was saying. I was watching the Pacers game last night.
That's right. Yeah.
Him and Brogdon are the pick and roll team. Those are the two best players on that team right now. Yeah.
Exactly. Sabonis against Ralph. And you texted me that he outplayed Ralph. He certainly did. He was the real star of that game. Ralph was overshadowed. I'm not sure whether Ralph was 100%, but Sabonis just played a phenomenal game, and the crowd there it was almost like an Olympic championship game. That's what some of the reporters, I was on press row, that's what some of the reporters said that they felt like it was. It was almost as though they were covering an Olympic championship game. A lot of pride, and it was just a great game. News agencies from all over the country were there, not just local, beat writers, but CNN was there. I know CNN, Turner at the time, I think was Turner TBS, Turner Broadcasting. There was a lot of national media there, and both Sabonis and Sampson were certainly the center of those media requests. I went with News Virginia, went down with our hero Jim Gordon, and told you the story about Jim. Just another one of those thousands and thousands of stories that needs to be written about Jim. The post-game locker room. It was just a great, great night. And you're right, it was one of those memories that, looking back on some of the things I've gotten to do as a sports writer, I feel pretty lucky in my old age.
I'll tell you the real reason I wanted to watch it play for play was because the weirdest thing stuck out in my memory when I started telling Crystal as we're watching, the end of an NBA game. I'm telling her about that game, which I had not. I watched when I was 10 years old. I was 10 years old when this game was played, 1982. And what I remembered from it, and not having seen it since or read about it since, I remembered a really interesting detail of all things I could remember, that the Russians had a guy foul out, player number 15, whose name I don't even know, but player number 15 fouled out, and their numbers on the international system went from 1 to 16. And I remembered that they tried to sneak him back in the game by putting a piece of tape making his 5 or 6. And, I wanted to test myself. Was that just something like that I made up in my mind, or kind of, just, over years kind of, falsely remembered or something? I saw it happen, Scott. It was in the overtime. I think it was the second overtime. They actually did that. They actually brought a guy in. Number 15 fouled out. He got a technical foul for his 5th foul. And they tried to sneak him back in with a piece of tape making him 16. And so that's what made us watch the second half and both overtimes of that game. But UVA won the game. To set the scene a little bit too, I mean, this was the Soviet national team. And just a few months before, this game was in November of 1982. It was a preseason game for UVA. The regular season didn't start back in that day and age until November 26th. I looked that up. It was November 26th when the UVA regular season started. This game was November 17th. We were still in preseason mode. The Soviet national team was on a tour of U.S. colleges. Back in August of 1982, the Soviet national team had beaten the U.S. national team to win the World Championships, what we now call the FIBA World Cup. But back then it was still called the World Championships, and that was a significant victory. They didn't play in the 1980 Olympics because the U.S. boycotted 1980. And so that Soviet team that played UVA, lost to UVA, had just beaten Team USA. Huge event it was a national TV event. This is before ESPN had wall-to-wall basketball. There was you had your NBC game of the week, and that was about it. This was a national TV event live from Richmond. Scott was there. I mean, wow, what a scene! to be a part of. And Scott, I gotta pry that story from Jim Gordon out of you. You texted me the story last night, but share with our listeners that great Jim Gordon story from after the game.
Well, hopefully most of our listeners have some recollection of Jim Gordon, and none of them will have the recollections that we do. But so the game's over. The media is escorted back into the locker rooms of each team. We actually got to go into the locker room of USSR, and order reporters around the number of the USSR players, and other than Sabonis, I could not tell you anything about that as it was 37 years ago. But Jim somehow or another found his way up to Sabonis and started in on one of Jim's long 2 to 3 minute questions, 2 to 3 minute questions. And Sabonis looked at him the whole time as though he was understanding every word that Jim said. And then when Jim finally stopped, Sabonis started speaking back to Jim in Russian. And, of course, Jim is starting to scribble down things on his yellow legal pad. And it took him about 30 seconds, I believe, to realize that Sabonis was speaking in Russian. Now, I would love to have been able to save that legal pad to see what exactly Jim was interpreting. So Jim was literally, and Sabonis had his security or team managers or something was like, Jim was like, wait a minute, I don't understand. What did? And the manager said, he doesn't speak English. But he understands English, but he doesn't speak English. And the look on Jim's face, it almost like, now what do I do? So, Jim basically was very disappointed in that he finally did get someone to do some translating for Sabonis, but Jim's 3-minute question literally got answered in 8 to 10 words. So you got to wonder how the translator really, how effective he was translating Jim's 3-minute question into what turned out to be about a 10-word answer.
Yeah. The translation was probably something along the lines of "Stupid American wants quote, give him quote, please." Yeah, that was probably the extent of it there.
The answer was probably we lost game because they scored more points.
Oh my! Jim was classic. Obviously, we miss Jim so much. But Jim Gordon, for those. Well, actually, there might be a lot of UVA, especially the older folks who are listening in, who would know Jim. Jim was around forever, 30 plus years, sports writer for the News Virginian. But back, he was on press row from the late '60s on, when UVA sports was an afterthought. I mean, this before Hoot Gibson was even the coach at UVA. Who was before Terry Holland, who was before everybody else. Back when UVA football was 1-9 or 1-10 every year, Jim was the guy. And then, of course, by the '80s, when UVA basketball had Ralph Sampson and going to Final Fours and such, it was a different situation. George Welsh became the football coach and everything else. But Jim was there when UVA sports were very much an afterthought. And into the mid 2000s, you probably would have heard 3-minute long questions asked of, well, George Welsh or Jeff Jones or Terry Holland or Pete Gillen. And those 3-minute questions came from our good Jim Gordon, who passed away a couple of years ago, and was the guy that gave both Scott and I our first jobs in sports, and so that's why we're here. Anytime you get a chance to tell a Jim Gordon story, it's a good day, I think, Scott.
Yeah, definitely, Chris. And that game, it was. I'm looking at it actually on YouTube. If you look at the Richmond Coliseum, there is not one empty seat in that entire arena. In fact, you can barely even see the aisles. I'm sure their Richmond Fire Marshal probably was the end of the Coliseum ever hosting 12,000 people, because I do believe at one point in time they listed capacity around 12, and then after that they dropped it to about 11.2, and I think that might have been the game.
Oh, I might lost Scott. You still there? Scott, you still there? Hey, Scott. Okay, I think I'm lost Scott. Yeah, I'll wrap up with one thing that was I also maybe Scott can still hear me, and maybe we'll be able to push a button. One thing that stood out to me too. This is just from the watching the broadcast of it standpoint. How many people were there wearing suits and ties and dressed up like they were going to a big show? It was, compared to now where we're all slobs. This was still that era, Scott. I mean, I was just, I don't know if you could hear me saying that, but how many people, when they kept showing shots of the crowd, fans in the upper deck wearing suits and ties, and fans in the lower level wearing suits and ties and everything else. That was quite the event. I mean, it looked like from that TV presentation of it, it was quite the event. Very very much something to have a memorable thing to have been a part of, I guess, from your standpoint.
Oh, it was, and I'm looking at it too. I see what you're saying. Yeah, it was an event, and it was like an Olympic event, and it was something people they respected, and I guess people in the 80s, early 80s, that was, if it was a major event, then you showed proper respect by dressing decently for it.
Yeah. Now we're all slobs, and including me when I'm sitting on press row. Maybe I should step that up. So that was fun. I got to work some nostalgia back into some more of these podcasts. I think folks like to kind of remember that. And for those who are too young to remember that, or even have been alive for that, yeah, UVA, which was the preseason number 1 team in 1982, beat the Russian national team. We'll call them the Russian national team. And the Russians tried to cheat, which, hey, breaking news, Russians try to cheat at things. And we still beat them at their game. So a lot of fun there. Well, okay, so UVA Purdue tomorrow night. UVA-Clemson Saturday night. Scott and I break speed limit laws getting back to Charlottesville for Sunday afternoon, Sunday at 4 o'clock, UVA, North Carolina. It's a big week in UVA sports, and a lot of stuff to look forward to. Scott, last thoughts as we head into this big week?
Well, I can't believe we're still playing football in a meaningful game. It should be fun. And, when kickoff comes, we're going to be normal Virginia fans, despite the fact that we're heavily underdogs. We're going to be there on pins and needles, and it wouldn't want to be anywhere else in Charlotte.
That's right. So Scott and I will be down there. We'll be live blogging during the game. We'll have all the post-game coverage you can imagine. And also check us out between now and then for the pregame coverage. Scott and I are both working on a lot of stuff to get you ready for UVA-Clemson especially. So for Scott Sherman, I'm Chris Graham signing off. Everybody have a great week.